Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around, I am playing as the Wood Elves against the Beastmen on the map, the Crack of Karkin. So for my composition, I did decide to run with Durthu, just because Durthu is a pretty powerful lord. Beastmen don't have much in the way of shooting, and he causes fear, terror, obviously. He's just a monstrous lord. He's very expensive, and that's really his only downside other than missiles. But Beastmen don't have missiles. Not good ones at any rate. I did come in with a bit of a hasty comp. I didn't quite have enough time to put it together, so I ended up with some spells I hadn't intended to bring, like the Amber Spear, and actually some leftover gold, because I simply didn't have enough time to throw the army together. I had about 400 gold left over that I didn't get to use. So I did put a Sword of Daith on him, I did throw Lamentation of Despair on him, and of course I did bring Flock of Doom and Wisdom's Wild Form. The Amber Spear was unintentional, and unfortunately I didn't manage to get the Call of the Wilds in there for additional Winds of Magic, because I had intended to strip him down completely with magic, and I didn't get around to doing that. I had originally not only intended to bring Flock of Doom. Alongside him, I did bring a Branch Wraith. The Branch Wraith is coming in with Awakening of the Wood, a little bit of against my opponent Clumps. This can really kind of beat him up with the explosion, and then Earthblood, of course, for the heals. I also did bring the Trickster Shard for that 22% damage boost for all my Dryads, and then, of course, did bring Call of the Woods for the +5 melee attack bonus, which makes, of course, Durthu even more monstrous and makes the Dryads much better than they already are. My front line is composed, as you've probably figured at this point, with a bunch of Dryads. Of course, the Beastmen don't have much in the way of fire damage. I actually don't think they have any units with fire. Dryads, of course, cause fear, which Beastmen are really susceptible to. A lot of their units have atrocious morale, and their physical resistance wears off pretty quickly, and Dryads are just good at killing lightly armored infantry. They are backed up by 2 units of Treekin, who are just there to kind of stiffen up the line and help them just hold their ground. And potentially tank enemy cavalry, that sort of stuff. They themselves don't dish out very much hurt, but that's okay. They're there to tank. And of course, Dryads with their 60 armor are actually decent against Gores and that sort of stuff. They actually have physical resistance of 20%, 60 armor, so they're very, very tanky. They're a lot tankier than their stats let on. Their only problem is that their HP pool per model is not the greatest, and they of course have that fire weakness. Behind that, we have 2 units of Wild Riders with shields. These guys are just powerful. Frenzy, fear, physical resistance, some armor. They're just an awesome cavalry unit. They'll trade very favorably with Centigores. They'll basically outtrade just about anything the Beastmen can field, except perhaps some of the Minotaur variants. I'm not entirely sure, but other than that, these guys basically outtrade anything the Beastmen can, and maybe Vestigores. And that's about it. And then 2 units of Glade Riders with Hagbane tips. Glade Riders with Hagbane tips, of course, do have great range. They outrange the missile range on the Ungor Raiders. They're pretty quick, so they're not really catchable by anything the Beastmen can bring. They can poison whatever they can't outrun normally, like the Warhounds. And of course they do magic damage, they do poison, all that sort of stuff. So just a very powerful unit. I do like my Glade Riders. Unfortunately, one of the big downsides of this build, though, is that there's a lack of armor piercing, and really this was down to the fact that I was rushing pretty quickly. I didn't get to really think the comp through all that well. So unfortunately I don't have much armor piercing, but I do have the Sword of Daith for that awesome debuff, which could potentially help. Also, usually people don't bring too many Vestigores against Wood Elves, because Wood Elves can of course bring a lot of armor piercing shooting, and actually their front line can be pretty armor piercing with a mix of Eternal Guard, War Dancers, and the Wildwood Rangers. So my opponent didn't bring any of that. For his lord, my opponent did decide to bring the Malagor the Dark Omen. You can see that one of the Rakshman Cygors is already flying out. He did bring an Ungor Spearman herd, a unit of Ungor Raiders here in the center, just to kind of try to bait me in, and then 2 Cygors. Now this has been a strategy that's been kind of flying around quite a bit. I do believe it was on Turin's channel. He demonstrated this strategy as well against Dwarves, where you set up a bunch of Cygors and you use them to force your opponent to push in, force your opponent to split up, and then kind of hit him from different sides, time down, keep it in place, and bombard him to heck with the Cygors. My opponent tried to do it against Wood Elves, which I think is a bit of a risky endeavor, but we shall definitely see how it works out. Out on the flank, my opponent does have a mix of Ungor herds and Gore herds with shields over on this flank, and on the other flank he does have another bit of a mixed group. He does have a unit of Minotaurs with shields, he does have 2 units of Centigores with great weapons, and 3 units of Gore Herd. And these guys aren't chevroned up, but there's 3 of them, and of course they're backed by this armor-piercing contingent. Minotaurs could definitely give me a run for my money, but they don't have very much armor, so all my units, despite not having anti-large, will still be able to do okay against them. You can see I'm doing a little bit of peppering fire here on the Ungor Spearmen with the poison arrows. My opponent is throwing some rocks at me, doing a little bit of damage. The Wild Riders are kind of limping through the line, which is a bit of a problem. You can see the Dryads are taking some nasty hits, and now I'm trying to kind of just whittle down my opponent's troops with the Glade Riders. And the Glade Riders, of course, with their poison and their long range, they can easily outkite the Ungor Raiders, who just have, or they're stuck on 115 range. They can't match the Glade Riders. Wild Riders are standing still. I don't want to commit them just yet. I have seen my opponent's troops here in the trees, but I realize that I need to shut down the Cygors, because if I don't shut down the Cygors before clumping around, or clumping into a fight, I'm going to take a massive pounding. Another shot does go into my Dryad. My Dryad. My opponent's definitely doing a decent job, just kind of hurting him. But I am still retaining a decent amount of units. Unfortunately, you can see the Dryads take a huge hit here. 15 models lost there, I think. And you can see the Cygors have already racked up 22 and 24 kills. So they're having a pretty great field day here. Up to 31 now. It's pretty crazy. Cygors do a lot of damage per hit. Over here, my Glade Riders are just trading fire with the Ungor Raiders, trying to stay a little safe. And now I'm charging the Wild Riders in, just intending to disrupt these Ungor Raiders and shut down the Cygor if and as needed. The Cygor has atrocious melee defense of, I do believe, 17 normally. So if I can surround it, I will be able to tear through it very quickly with Wild Riders. You can see it's already tanked by a huge amount of HP, and now it's getting shredded by the angry Wild Riders. Wild Riders are not immune to psychology, but as long as Frenzy is up, they are immune to psychology. They also cause fear, so they're immune to fear. In the meantime, Ungor Raiders are getting shredded. Over here, I'm definitely overloading these poor spears. This is way more than I need to commit here. 2 Dryads is way too much. Should have really just left 1 Dryad on these guys and pushed everything onto this left flank. You can see I'm shifting my Wild Riders around, trying to wrap up these spears and break him. Durthu is not committed just yet. I'm kind of waiting to see how things develop, trying to crush this Cygor before his reinforcements come. Seeing this whole push, I swing Durthu around to go reinforce. My opponent has actually forgotten about his Centaurs. It's still sitting there in the woods. You can see the Cygor here is getting beaten down, and I'm pushing Durthu into the fray, going after these Ungor herds, trying to shut them down. My opponent has summoned a 3rd Cygor. Of course, you can do that with Malagor's ability, with Malagor's spell, and you can see he's already racked up 12 kills because my troops are so clumped. Over here, I've used Dryads to take on the Cygor rather than committing the Wild Riders. The Wild Riders disengaged to go to the Ungors, and now I'm going to be able to just surround this, or start slugging it out with these Cygors and the Gore and all that sort of stuff. On the left flank, Durthu did drop a Flock of Doom on these Gore herds, and now he's getting a rear charge on him, and of course he causes fear, he causes terror, he does a lot of damage, he's popping Sword of Daith, so that is going to be absolutely shredding these guys. Sword of Daith is an incredibly potent spell, and it does a lot of AoE damage, plus of course that armor debuff, which is fairly relevant against these troops. Dryads are having a bad time of it, but slowly but surely they're whittling down the Minotaurs with shields, the Cygor as well. And they're doing all in all okay. The Branch Straight's also in there, and you can see these poor Gors are just getting absolutely terrified. Durthu is just having none of it, just monkey stomping him and doing a really great job. The Wild Riders now have shifted back and are able to go over there. You can see the Dryads are surrounding the Cygor. One of the great things about Dryads is that they are immune to psychology. So while they don't have that bonus against against large, like Eternal Guard would, they won't get terrified by a Cygor. No matter what. Now, I do see that this situation here is not ideal. My troops are clumped, my opponent's troops are clumped, but you can see the Dryads are starting to buckle. And despite my Glade Riders doing their best to kind of pepper down the Cygor, it's not really happening that quickly. So I'm going to cycle charge into my opponent's back here with the Wild Riders. They're still a pretty healthy unit, and they will hopefully be able to buckle these Ungors. One of the things I could have definitely done here, or probably should have tried to do, is get an Awakening of the Wood off into this clump, because it would have done a lot of damage. Over here on the flank in the meantime, Minotaurs with shields are getting shredded. They're down to a fraction of their HP. Durthu's in the fray there. Durthu is going to lay the smack down on these guys. And the Dryads are actually holding up okay against the Minotaurs. And they'll be able to take them down with some speed. They definitely hit pretty hard. 34 weapon strength, 40 melee attack. They're not terrible. And Minotaurs have pretty atrocious melee armor. They have pretty atrocious armor. Fortunately, though, my opponent's Gore herds are coming back into the fray, and you can see they're diving in. There's still this Gore herd that my opponent hasn't gotten in. These Dryads are surrounding and beating down the summoned Cygor, and the Cygor is, of course, disintegrating. But the key here is that they're tying it down and preventing it from shooting. It's better that I lose a few Dryads here or there. It's only taking off about 15 models, I think, on maybe 20 models on these Dryads. It's better that I lose some Dryads than I start losing dozens of troops here in this blob to my opponent's Cygor shots. You can see I do swing my Wild Riders around, trying to surround Malagor and do some damage to him. And that summoned Cygor has gone away. Now the Wild Riders are constantly cycle charging in and out against these Gors, trying to break him. They do cause fear, so with my opponent's morale being tanked like this, and he's being feared by the Dryads, all that sort of stuff, he is going to break rather quickly if I can get with this full surround, being peppered down by arrows and all that sort of stuff. And you can see the Gore herds are going to start to break. And once they rout, they're going to be as good as dead. On the left flank, things are going fairly well, though a little less well, I think, than on the other flank. The Cygor has routed off, but because there's so much cannon fodder infantry being thrown into the fray, they are tying me down, they're wasting my time, and unfortunately I'm going to make a bit of an error here. I'm going to chase after my opponent's Gore herds with the Wild Riders, and I forget about the Wild Riders, and the Wild Riders are going to get slaughtered here in the woods. I'm not entirely sure how that happened, because I didn't see, but they will get caught by the Gore herd, they get surrounded. My opponent finally notices Centaurs, and those guys are as good as dead. Over here in this around Malagor, he's getting beaten down by the Dryads. You can see the Dryads, despite being incredibly weak when they went in against him, he's only a caster, and his melee stats are not particularly great, and the Dryads are actually doing laying quite the smackdown on him. They're definitely trading pretty effectively with Malagor. Over here, this whole clump has broken. There's only one unit of Ungors left, but Ungors are a joke. They have really bad stats all over. So they're going to get ridden down, and with this kind of disintegration, I'm going to be able to sick my Dryads on all of these Ungors, who are now fairly slow. They're only the same speed as Dryads. So I'll be able to sick my Dryads and Wild Riders and the ammo-less Glade Riders on all these Ungors and Gors, and just kind of start riding them down. Over here, though, Malagor has successfully routed off my Dryads. This second unit of Dryads is trying to get into the fray. It is important to keep in mind the charge bonus actually does boost your leadership, so if you can get close enough to launch a charge, your units will often stick around for a little longer just because they got that charge bonus off. Over here, Durthu is still laying the smackdown on these annoying Gors. My opponent has, or is finally finishing off the poor Wild Riders. You can see the Wild Riders are definitely traded. They definitely did quite a bit of hurt here. You can see that Minotaurs are still around at 6 models. There's a few Gors in there. And these Centaurs are still there, so things could be a little hairy. I have realized now that there's something bad in the woods for me, but too little too late. This whole force is isolated, and it's only really Durthu, some Treekin, and a very small group of Dryads. There's only 21 Dryads in there, but Durthu can definitely smack down the Cygor. The Cygor doesn't have the best of leadership, and Durthu causes a lot of damage. Over here on this flank, you can see the Dryads are engaging on this Gore Herd, and they're so weak at this point that the Gore Herd has 3 times the amount of HP, so they're going to be a bit of a rough spot, and they don't even get the charge bonus off because I wasn't paying attention. But the rest of these troops is getting routed off. You can see the Glade Riders are running them down. They're just kind of beating the snot out of them in melee. You can see over here the Gores are taking some damage, but they're melting down the Dryads much quicker than the Dryads are hurting them. And I'm able to rout off this Gore Herd. And hopefully shortly thereafter I will be able to collapse on these Gores and just start kind of beating them up. You can see I'm trying to get a rear charge. I was trying to get a last second rear charge in with the Glade Riders, and I do get a little bit of a charge in. Glade Riders are still fairly healthy, and one of the important things is that Glade Riders don't have the worst of melee stats. 24 melee defense, 28 melee attack, 27 weapon strength. It's all passable. It's not comparable to Gore Herd, but it's definitely decent. And there's more of them in that unit. My opponent has gotten his Centaurs into the fray, but I did manage to pop the Sword of Daith on him with Durthu, and so Durthu managed to kind of swat away those annoying Centaurs and drive them away. In the meantime, Malagor was routing off over here, and you can see he's right here, I don't know, casting a lantern to light his way through the dark woods. So for my army, the Wild Riders performed incredibly well at just shutting down my opponent's Cygors early on, and then they were followed in by the Dryads. The Dryads, of course, did a great job just murdering the Gores and the Ungors and that whole mix of units. You can see none of those units performed very well on the kills, and that's definitely one of the things people I think don't realize. I think people still don't realize this really about the Wood Elves, is that Dryads have been buffed. Dryads are now the functional equivalent of mid-tier armored infantry. They are comparable in armor or survivability to, I'm trying to think of a unit that would fall into this exact same category, but they are, for example, I would say comparable to a unit like White Lions as far as raw survivability goes. Now, obviously, they don't have the armor-piercing damage. Their melee defense isn't the greatest, but they definitely have that high base armor value of 60, stacked on top of a 20% physical resist. So against a lot of factions, they're actually a very tanky unit, especially in this sort of situation, and especially compared to Gores. This is basically an ideal matchup. Gores have practically no armor, they have pitiful melee defense, and they have no armor piercing, so the Dryads do really, really well against them. Wild Riders is great. The Glade Riders did actually surprisingly well, surprisingly good as well. They definitely got to pick apart some enemy troops. Obviously, some of the Beastmen infantry did rout off, and that was why there wasn't that many kills, I suppose. Flock of Doom was great for Durthu. I definitely didn't get to complete this build. I had about 400, 500 points left over probably, and if I'd had a little more time, I could have chevrons different stuff up, or perhaps got an extra unit in there, maybe a unit of Glade Guard, something like that. Minotaurs did okay. The Cygors didn't have the best of time. They definitely did a little bit of damage, and if I had brought Eternal Guard, they would have done better, I think, than they did, because Cygors with their very powerful single target damage or single kind of blob damage. With the way Eternal Guard is much more blobbed up than Dryads, they would have been hitting many more units with every rock than they were against the Dryads. They would have definitely been raking in much more kills, I think, and they would have probably been more effective. Ungors had a terrible time. Malagor, I think, was a decent pick. He is not terrible. The only problem with Malagor is that obviously he's very squishy and he's not really combat capable, definitely less so than Morgur or Kazrak. He got beaten down pretty hard by Dryads, in spite of the fact that those Dryads were incredibly depleted from fighting a Cygor. I definitely think that one of the things, and as a wrapping up thought, I think that when you're playing against Wood Elves, it's not a bad idea to bring a handful of Bestigors into your composition. You definitely want some armor piercing in your comp, and perhaps some armor. Wood Elves, while they have a lot of armor or a lot of armor piercing, can definitely sometimes struggle, especially because you don't really expect armor going up against Beastmen. That's their only armored unit, and it's not that common of a sight. But bringing a unit or two of Bestigors could be a decent idea. And then one of the important things with Bestigors is they're not actually slow. They're one of the fastest, if not the fastest, heavy infantry in the game. I think the only heavy infantry that's comparable without Primal Instincts triggered is Wildwood Rangers, but Wildwood Rangers, as we know, aren't really heavy infantry. Their armor is trash. So that's just something to keep in mind, I think, with Beastmen. And Wood Elves obviously have a huge selection of anti-large, and their cavalry trades very favorably with your cavalry, so I think it's a bit of a rough matchup in some ways for Beastmen. So you either need to swamp the Wood Elves with sheer numbers, or you need to, and perhaps some Bestigors are a good idea. So those are just my 2 cents. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Definitely a great game to sold my Sam Squatch, and I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about the game or anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.